If you and I are both creating it, no agreement was signed beforehand. And so what it means is that we each own half of it. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Conscious Counsel podcast with your host, Cory Sterling. That's me. What's up? I hope everyone is doing fantastic and having a wonderful week. As always, the promise with the Conscious Counsel podcast is to share stories and information and have a little bit of fun in helping you protect and grow your wellness business with both confidence and clarity. I want you to understand the sort of questions and issues that I see coming up in my email inbox, the way that I support my clients, and the solutions I get for them, and what sort of issues they don't understand and things that are blocking their ways from taking their business to the next level when they're held back by legal issues, stress, and any other problems that come up without being legally protected. In this week's episode, I want to talk about the importance of ensuring that you own the intellectual property that your business creates. And I'm going to share a story that I went through with one of my clients. And it's a story I've been through many, many, many times with many of my clients, unfortunately. And it just, for me, I have to go out there and just say like, hey, these are the rules. This is what you need to do. This is the timing of when you need to do it. And so let's hop into it right away. The legal principles, the specific issue in this story had to do with a client of mine who was running a teacher training at their studio. This was a yoga studio. And this is a very, very classic situation and of two people working together to create training materials. I wrote a book called The Yoga Law Book, which you can find on Amazon. And one of the chapters in the Yoga Law Book had to do with one of the first stories I had as a lawyer, where one of my clients created training materials. It's the exact same story again, but they didn't assert their intellectual property rights in the training materials. And that caused a lot of problems. And so the first part of this episode, I just want to explain the rules, essentially how the rules work. So what we're talking about here is like creating manuals, creating processes, taking all of your work and putting it into some form of manual that you teach. Then you then run a training. You teach people you teach people Pilates, you teach them how to be CrossFit instructors, you teach them how to do a yoga training, a specific type of yoga, whatever it is. Anytime you're running a training and certifying other people, or really anytime you're running anything and giving people a product, when you're delivering to them your intellectual property, your ideas. And the general rule is as follows. So remember, everything we want written contracts for everything, because the whole point of a written contract is it says, hey, the rules, the laws are already determined, but we're allowed to come up with a contract that will make our own laws and our own rules to say what we can do. And the classic rule when it comes to contracts is two parties can agree to anything that is not illegal. So long as you're working with someone and you get someone to sign a contract with something, that contract will apply and it will replace what the ordinary rules are, so long as whatever you have in that contract is not illegal, which for most of my clients, it's very rarely an issue. So there are general rules that exist around intellectual property creation, and there are rules about who owns what if two people are working together on something. And those rules will apply unless there's a contract that replaces those rules with another set of rules. So that's what we're talking about here. When it comes to intellectual property and creating of materials, there are certain rules, and I'm going to explain those rules in 1 second. Those rules apply. So let's say no one ever signs a contract. The government and the jurisdictions have their own set of rules where they're like, cool, no signed contract. These are the basic rules that will apply. But in the event that you and someone else decided to sign a contract and to create a legal relationship around ownership of something, we'll honor that so long as whatever you've written is not illegal. And don't worry about the illegal part because it very rarely happens that way. So the rules are as follows. If two people contribute to the creation of something, so if I'm writing a training manual and I invite you to join me and I'm like, hey, I'm going to talk about the legal part and I'm going to talk about the traveling part and you're going to talk about the accounting part and you're going to talk about the marketing part. I don't know, I'm just coming up with an example. And we put that together and we're like, great, this is how you run a law business. And you have the back end of it as well with finances and marketing and legal services and whatever. If you and I are both creating it and we do not have an agreement stating otherwise, we each own 50% of the materials that have been created. So you and I create something together. In the case of my client, it was a yoga teacher training manual. No agreement was signed beforehand. And so what it means is that we each own half of it. Now, what happens is when two parties both own some form of intellectual property or materials, they have equal rights in it. So they both have legal rights, which means they're both entitled to use it. They're both entitled to profits from it. They're both entitled to do whatever they want with it, unless agreed otherwise. It's always like the dun dun dun. The dun 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 is always unless agreed otherwise. And so what's really important when you're creating a training manual or you're creating a teacher training or you're creating any sort of intellectual property and you're working with another person is that you have an agreement which outlines the respective rights, entitlements, responsibilities around using those materials. And so if you do not have a contract, let's say you're a studio owner and you're listening to this, you've created a teacher training, you don't have a contract, and you've hired one of your teachers or an instructor or a friend to help create that manual or that training. At law, they have 50% ownership. I mean, if you could show that you did all of it and they did very little, it could be proportionate, but it still means that anytime you use those materials, that person is an owner. They have all of the legal rights as an owner for the materials, which means that you have to pay them. They're entitled to revenue, they're entitled to money for it. If they don't want it used a certain way, they could make a legal fuss or an issue. Essentially, they have legal rights around it. And what I always want for my clients is for them to be in control of the situation legally and to be able to decide what they want to do and how they want to do it. And the issue is when you create materials like training materials or other intellectual property materials and you don't sign an agreement, you don't have the best version of rights. You don't have the strongest legal position. And whatever you've created, the other person who you're working with also has an entitlement to it. So now's a perfect time for me to sort of transition into my story here. And so the story was as follows, and I've given a couple hints and I've explained it a little bit. Studio owner, awesome, crushing it, has a bunch of different teacher trainings that they run. And they decided to run a new training with one of their instructors from the studio. And they created the training materials together and they started selling the training. So they put out, hey guys, if anybody wants, we're doing this extra training on this particular subject. And the materials that they were using for the training was from the studio owner, who's my client, plus this instructor who they also hired to help make the materials. No signed contract. So because there's no signed contract between them, the general intellectual property rules will apply. And that means that they're entitled to an equal split of whatever money's brought in. They each have legal rights in what's been created. Now, the issue came up, and this always happens. There was a disagreement between the studio owner and the instructor. And the studio owner came to me and was like, hey, I really don't want to work with this person anymore. They're doing all of these they're making all of these problems. They're telling everyone that it's theirs. Whatever issues were going on, they just didn't want to work with the person. And they're like, now what do I do about this training that I've already sold? And what about the materials for the training? And again, we did not have the strongest legal position. So in this case, I advised the client, I'm like, okay, well, firstly, whatever you have in the manual, you have to take out whatever it is that you had, whatever it is the other person had. You can't use any of their ideas. You have to be able to prove that whatever materials you had were yours and that you had them before. And you have to go to everyone who signed up and said, hey, this person was a contributing member to the training. They're no longer participating. If you want a full refund and do not want to participate any longer because you thought you'd be learning from them and with their materials, we will totally honor that and we'll give everyone a refund. No problems, no issues. And then my client is just going to use their own materials. Now, a couple of things, and then I'm going to talk about the best case scenario or what should have happened. This is very distressing. It's a very, very difficult situation. I've been through this many, many times with clients and they get very upset. It's very emotional. Because it's your business, you've done all of the things, and now there's someone else who's in your business who you want out, and you don't have the legal recourse to be able to just say gone, cool, I'm in control of the situation, I'll do whatever I want. And it's more of the work for me as a lawyer in this context. A lot of the times it's more of listening and supporting because I've been through this so many times and I already know what the solution is once the call starts, but my client doesn't know that. And my client's emotional and they're not sleeping and they're upset and they're demotivated and they don't want to run the training and they don't want to do these things for their business. And I see this all the time. And this is really why I record the podcast, to share my stories. Also, I don't want you to make that same mistake. So in this case with the client, I was like, cool, this is what we're doing. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, whatever. We go through it. She actually did a fantastic job. She was courageous and brave and like did all the things that she had to do. I think of the 9 people that were signed up for the training, one of them asked for a refund. And obviously, it was difficult to cut this teacher out of the training, but they were able to do it. Now, best case scenario and how we help clients who practice proactive law is you'd sign a contract and you have something that's called a work for hire contract, which means that you are hiring someone in your business to produce some form of intellectual property. You're going to pay them, and they agree that in exchange for accepting that money, you have all the intellectual property rights. They relinquish any legal rights they would have otherwise. They have no entitlements, everything. Just like, cool, I'm paying you to help create this. I'm going to pay you a one-time fee of $1,000. And once I've paid you that $1,000 and you've delivered the materials, they belong to the business and we can do whatever we want, however we want. And you have no legal rights and you're not allowed to do whatever it is that you want with it. And it usually comes in the form of a licensing agreement where there will be a work for hire provision, but that's the answer. And it's pretty simple. And it was cool with this client because she signed up for the Conscious Counsel Plus membership right away. We had lots of calls over a short period of time. Like there was a moment where she really needed me and I was there. And then we also got her a licensing agreement for other things that she's doing or that she will do in the future that will protect the IP. Because what I want for all my clients is to be legally secure and in control of the situation. And when you don't have a signed agreement that's specific to the goals that you have, the way you want to run your business, the relationships you want to have, you're at the subject to the rule of law. In this case, intellectual property laws that say if 2 people create something together, unless agreed otherwise in a contract, then they both own it and they both have rights and they can both decide what happens with it. When you have something like a licensing agreement with a work for hire provision or provisions like that, then people can say, hey, I'm paying you this. I own all of it. I'm keeping all the money from the training. You don't get to decide anything and I can do whatever I want with it. And it's like paying for something and then you own it. And that's perfect. And that's what I want for my clients. So just as a summary for this week's episode, I was talking about intellectual property rights and essentially that if you're creating a manual or a training and you bring someone else on to do it and you do not have a signed agreement about who owns what and who's paying for what and what rights you have, the basic intellectual property laws will always say that anyone who contributes has ownership in it. And having ownership means you have rights, you have entitlements, and that you're entitled to certain benefits as being an owner, including revenue, deciding how the work is used, how it's not used, and in perpetuity, forever, as long as you continue using that. I told the story about one of my clients who had a training with one of their instructors and wanted to stop working with that person because it was problematic, and they didn't have a signed contract until we got it for them, and it was very problematic. In the end, we were able to get the results, but it's just one of those instances with a client where I wish I could have before they started making the materials, I wish that this client would have purchased the licensing agreement with work for hire provisions and other relevant provisions in the agreement as well. We are where we are. We went through the problem. We resolved it. We got over it. And now everything's fantastic. So I want you to build your health and wellness business with confidence and clarity. I want you to understand that if you're creating intellectual property materials or you're running trainings, it's really, really, really important to make sure that you have the appropriate agreements and that everything is organized beforehand so that you're in control of the situation. The person starts acting weird, wants to take it in a different direction. Who cares? Whatever it is, awesome. I paid you for it. I own it. I can do whatever I want. And you're in control of the situation. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you want, why don't you just find us on Instagram at Conscious Counsel, send us a message. And if you have any questions or concerns, Instagram's the best way to hit us up. So hope that you enjoyed the episode. Sending all of my love, wishing you a wonderful week. And whatever you do, make sure you work with a lawyer who loves you.